My experience with Bethesda's open world games is pretty limited, and I think it's safe to say that puts me in the vast minority. I've completed Fallout 3 and played a fair bit of Oblivion, but neither game really stuck with me. I've decided to give these guys one last chance and play through Skyrim, examining what works, what doesn't, and what value can be found here. My conclusion is that this game is downright terrible and its redeeming factors just aren't worth the trouble, whether or not it's in virtual reality. The player begins as a captured prisoner, readied for execution when a dragon attack interrupts the proceedings. Everyone is surprised because dragons are supposed to have been extinct for a very long time, and now they're back and wreaking havoc. One thing leads to another, and it's revealed that the player is some special chosen one who can absorb the souls of fallen dragons and keep them from being revived. While a civil war plays out on the front and an opposing nation slowly spies and invades from the shadows, the player must balance the oppositions and defeat the dragons once and for all. There's a lot going on in the story, from political intrigue to ancient evils awakening, and it's all told fairly well. Characters have realistic motivations that they back up through their words and actions.
I fight for the men I've held in my arms, dying on foreign soil. I fight for their wives and children whose names I heard whispered in their last breaths. I fight for we few who did come home, only to find our country full of strangers wearing familiar faces. I fight for my people, impoverished to pay the debts of an empire too weak to rule them, yet brands them criminals for wanting to rule themselves. I fight so that all the fighting I've already done hasn't been for nothing. I fight because I must.
The story is pretty good, and it's paced fairly well, with each major plot point taking place in some far-off section of the country to help keep the environments varied. That said, it's not exactly well written half the time, and even scripted scenarios can have some pretty stupid situations.
Vuta med Kodav, caught like a bear in a trap. Zokfrini grin kograd runviki, dovakin. Ah, I forget. You do not have the Dova speech.
How? How did you forget? You just spoke in English. There's quite a bit of customization available, starting with the player character's race, each of which specializes in different skills, but each skill can be leveled up independently to allow for vastly different playstyles. It works similar to Final Fantasy II in the sense that using spells will increase affinity with that spell type, and taking damage will improve defenses with the equipped armor type. The same goes for sneaking, lockpicking, haggling prices to merchants, and so on. There's definitely enough here to encourage different ways to play, and although it takes quite a while to max out even a single skill, the game's world is wide enough to keep you busy for some time. Skyrim's map and its density of content is by far its strongest point. It's easy enough to just walk in a single direction and run into some random quest with its own self-contained story. Here, I just happened upon a cave full of vampires and proceeded to kill them all one by one. Then, while looting their precious treasure, I found a rock that spoke to me.
A new hand touches the beacon. Listen, hear me and obey. A foul darkness has seeped into my temple. A darkness that you will destroy.
It turns out that an old god had been stripped of her power by an evil necromancer, and she now seeks a champion to return her to her former glory. I love little side stories like that, and Skyrim spreads a deluge of them across its world. From bar fights to werewolves to eldritch gods.
Be warned, many have thought as you do. I have broken them all. You shall not evade me forever.
Not all of the side quests can be great, and like I said earlier, the writing isn't always the best, but the sheer scale and scope of the world is impressive nonetheless. So I've painted a real pretty picture of Skyrim, and I wish I could leave it at that, but unfortunately, the actual gameplay itself is absolutely horrendous. There is no getting around this. Combat boils down to two people swinging at each other until one of them turns into a ragdoll, and there's hardly any strategy to be had along the way. Even when it comes to fighting a dragon, the most hyped up battles in the game, and I'm just swinging blindly in the air while taking hits to the face. I rarely even have to block, and I can heal at any time, so danger is pretty much irrelevant. And this is quite literally the entire game. It's a little more dynamic when multiple enemies are involved, since proper positioning will help with battles, but for the most part, the combat is very shallow. I know that first-person melee-driven games rarely have the best execution, but I'm not sure I understand why not. Simply implement a stamina mechanic that has ramifications. Make it so I can't block anymore when I'm out of stamina, or at least limit the player in some way that matters. Make it so that both the enemy and the player receive stagger upon certain hits, which might add more value to shields. Maybe add a dash button that quickly moves the player a short distance at the cost of stamina. Just do something to make combat feel more impactful, because right now it feels like I'm swatting flies. Even Condemned managed better first-person melee combat by making each swing feel like it had some weight behind it. And I'm not trying to break the game either. My equipment is stuff that I've picked up along the way, and I've used the same basic level 1 healing spell since the beginning. And it certainly doesn't help that everything regenerates. Not only do I have a healing spell, but both my magic and health constantly regenerate on their own anyway. Offering all these customization and combat options doesn't mean much if the game never challenges the player to use them properly. The gameplay is as bare bones as you can get. As I said earlier, it's a beautiful and expansive world to explore. Graphically speaking, it actually holds up quite well, aside from the occasional low-quality texture. I'm actually impressed considering that this is a 6-year-old game from a prior generation. But regardless of how powerful the graphics are or how majestic the art direction might be, it doesn't help when glitchy artifacts are sprayed about, or when idiotic NPCs ruin a scene. Skyrim's engine is just straight up broken on a fundamental level. Characters that I'm supposed to follow will just stop in their tracks for extended periods for no reason. It's already bad enough that the combat is lazy and uninspired, and that the limits of the game's artificial intelligence is just to bum rush the player. But opponents are also completely incapable of properly defending themselves. It's really easy to take potshots with arrows from the safety of shadows, and the enemy will rarely figure out where the shots are coming from. They rarely even attempt to leave the room or go on proper patrols. I can never tell if something is intentional or if it's not functioning properly. This giant, menacing robot looks like it was supposed to be a really cool boss fight, but then he just stands there and lets me pummel him to death. I don't get it. What was the designer's intention here? Probably the most absurd situation was when a random character ran up to talk to me and made me freeze in place while I am being assaulted by enemies. And this happened twice.
Take this and hold on to it. I'll be back with you later. I'll pay you good. Don't lose it. No time to talk. No time to talk. Snitch or...
At least have the decency to pause the game. The last point I want to bring up is with the virtual reality implementation. Because of all the things they could have screwed up, I was really hoping that they would at least get this right. For starters, full traditional locomotion and controls are available via the regular DualShock 4 controller. The only thing that's been cut out is the ability to look up and down with the right stick, and it seems like they've removed the third-person camera. So I don't understand why they still bother to allow you to customize how your character looks, but whatever. For the most part, it works just fine. However, menus will often get caught within the game's geometry, which is not only poor to look at, but also makes the text impossible to read. It also makes no sense why menus have to be rendered in the 3D space. It would have been far more convenient if they were 2D graphics placed on the uppermost layer so that they never get in the way and are always easy to read. It is really cool to be able to see the map from above in a sort of bird's eye view, and to have your head in the stars in order to physically look around at all your level up constellations. It's not the most convenient method, but it is neat and you get used to it quickly enough. What's impossible to get used to is the constant transitions. Going in and out of the map screen or traveling between areas will bring on a swath of bright colors coming in directly from black. This obviously isn't a big deal on a television screen, but it's a serious problem in VR when the screen is literally inches from your eyes. And this is considering that the brightness is dialed back all the way. This is not a demanding game. I don't need to jump right into the action as soon as I've loaded into the next area. There is no reason why a slower fade from black transition isn't implemented to give my eyes time to adjust. Or better yet, don't go to black at all. Go to a neutral gray color so that the jump back into gameplay isn't so drastic. This is a major issue because no other game makes me nauseous or gives me a headache in the same way that Skyrim does. And I'm positive that this is the main reason why. As for the motion controls, they're really awkward, but they do seem to work for the most part. Full locomotion is still available, although it's an embarrassing oversight that the player can't hold up their shield and walk backwards at the same time. Aiming an arrow is far more difficult without a crosshair, although aiming spells in 2 different directions is pretty cool. Using a shield is pretty broken though. I can swing my weapon past my shield and completely debase whatever balance was originally intended in the game. If you already like Skyrim and you want a new way to play, then this isn't so bad, but it's not going to change any minds about either the game or motion controls in general. In the end, Skyrim is a giant playground that's full of broken toys. I don't care that I can craft my own weapons and armor and customize them with different effects. I don't care that there are a million potions to concoct or hundreds of treasures to discover, or that I can get married and have kids and decorate my house. None of that matters to me because what I'm going to be doing with all that content is worthless. The combat is pathetic and the artificial intelligence used throughout the game is a joke. I managed to complete the story in about 25 hours along with doing some side quests here and there, and while I'm sure there's easily another 100 hours in additional content, I can't imagine that any of it will be much better. I don't even get why higher difficulty options are available because it's not like the gameplay changes. All it does is alter the damage given and received in order to prolong or shorten fights. Not to mention that this is never explained in-game and the player has to actively search for the difficulty setting in order to change it. And it's set to the easiest by default, so I'd imagine that most people won't even know and they're just gonna play through it that way none the wiser. Regardless of how challenging the game is anyway, I'm still just hovering my weapon in front of someone's face until one of us dies, and that's about it. If you want pure exploration and you don't mind brain-dead gameplay, then Skyrim is probably up your alley. I mean, hell, the game is a super multi-million seller with over 200 Game of the Year awards, so I guess people love this game and I'm just the odd man out. But I think it's fair to demand a better experience. Even if the gameplay is poor, I could at least tolerate it if it weren't for the fact that Skyrim just feels so unpolished. I get that making gigantic games is not easy, but after 6 years and from a major developer like Bethesda, some of these glitches are just inexcusable. It's tough for me to recommend Skyrim because, in my opinion, this game doesn't even reach a baseline average. Thank you for watching my review on The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim VR. If you enjoyed this video, click the like button, and if you'd like to see more, subscribe. And Happy New Year, everyone!